very near and dear to my heart. I assume I was asked to talk on this because I teach a class to high school students on this topic, critical thinking in our culture. I also have adults come in the evening so that we can, I don't like to think of it as me teaching as much as it's kind of I present, and we have this wonderful small group atmosphere where we learn from each other and have great discussions. I am a former homeschool mom. I have 4 sons and 1 daughter. I went to San Jose State University. I got an English degree with a concentration in career writing, and that would include things like research journalism, proofreading, editing, etc. But my parents were science people. And so I was kind of like a black sheep in our family that, you don't want to major in biology? No. My mom was a microbiologist, and my dad was a physicist, and he worked on the space program. He worked on the Discoverer satellite. He was a principal scientist for Westinghouse. So I learned about reasoning and critical thinking in my very science-oriented family. I grew up steeped in data analysis and, the scientific method. But I learned more about thinking logically by observing people who don't. And I think that you can all agree that when you see that it's not happening, it's very obvious. And so being asked to talk on this, I teach a class that has 30 lessons on various cultural issues and logical fallacies and how to talk to people about this. So to try to condense that down into an hour was impossible. So, and I know some of you are looking forward to a lecture on how depraved our culture is and how we should open our eyes and what we can do about it. And so we will do that, but I've condensed it down into 3 minutes. So I've captured the gist of the culture wars in a montage, and I've set it to stirring music because, I teach high school kids and I need to keep them awake. So, let me see here. I'll get started on this. I'm extremely techie, as you can see. So what we'll do is we'll look at that, and then we'll look at how critical thinking is needed in every aspect of our lives. So here goes. Get to the end of the movement. was also a piano teacher, so I really like classical music. So sometimes we look at the world and we think it's absolutely gone crazy, or we think we've gone crazy, or we think things are totally out of control. But the reality is that the Bible told us it would be like this. Going back to the Old Testament, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord God, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. And then in the New Testament, and the kids in my class know that I love taking from the Old Testament and the New Testament, all in the same lesson, because it's one story. Paul warns Timothy, for the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but have itching ears. They will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. So the idea of reason comes from God himself. We worship a God of order and reason. And Christians are not immune to wandering off into myths. And I hope I don't step on anybody's toes here, but I'm happy to discuss this with you after if I need to. But did you know that there is a growing flat earth movement among Christians? And I think that this is very understandable based on our distrust of the government, and an understandable distrust of the government. But just before I move on from this slide, rest assured the Greek astronomer Eratosthenes accurately measured the Earth's circumference more than 2,200 years ago. Many other astronomers and mathematicians of antiquity understood the Earth to be a sphere long before NASA and the military-industrial complex. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But on the subject of outer space, this is a picture of a black hole. And since I am a writer, I love to use analogies, so here goes. Some may say that people have lost the ability to think logically, to examine evidence, or to analyze data. Or even that we no longer debate moral issues in a way where we're wrestling with ideas so that we can come up with a good solution. I would agree that all of this is true, but I also believe that our present darkness comes from the absence of thought, that many people don't bother to think at all. They simply do what they are told, what they believe is popular, or what they feel like doing at any given moment. And, you know, this poor guy recognizes something doesn't feel right here, but you notice he's not turning around. Still headed for the cliff. Just like the black hole in outer space, this cultural darkness has a force that's so powerful, it's capable of drawing in anything nearby. And like a black hole that pulls in light and matter, this cultural hole can pull us in as well, including the church. In our culture, the darkness that hides God's glory, his word, his creation, his sacrifice is the result of people rejecting the truth, although some may still search for it in the darkness. Others may know the truth, like the little lemming, but are afraid to speak about it, or to speak up. And this is nothing new. In John, we see that even among the rulers, many believed in him, but because the Pharisees did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. So in a black hole, light and matter cannot escape once they cross that gravitational field. Thankfully, unlike outer space, there's always hope for a person to come out of the darkness. And we need to keep that in mind when we engage with others, you know, if they have not yet seen the light. One more important thing to know about black holes, thanks to my father who's in the space program, of course we're going into this whole space analogy, but you know, he would be so proud of me. One thing about black holes is they don't suck in everything within their vicinity. Objects must come very close to its gravitational field, which is why a black hole can exist in a universe without taking in all the planets and stars and everything around it. So here's the good news in our analogy, is if we keep our distance from the darkness, we are not as easily drawn in. And so we have to stay close to the Lord and in constant pursuit of the truth. And let's also keep that in mind as we look at the current state of our culture, because it can create fear, helplessness, hatred, and confusion, and that does not come from the Lord. Paul again tells Timothy, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." Hopelessness and helplessness the opposite of power. And of course, love is the opposite of hatred. And so we also need to remember that as we look at some of these evil things going on in our culture, and sometimes we look at the people that are pushing those agendas, we need to understand that hatred is not what wins them over, it's love. And it may seem counterintuitive, but the goal here, I think, when we talk about critical thinking, is how can we be persuasive to change people's hearts and minds? And then, of course, a sound mind is the opposite of confusion. So why critical thinking is critical? And how critical is it? It's pretty critical. Words used to have meaning, and yet lately when you hear people talking, sometimes you hear them talking about a word and discussing something, and it sounds like they're talking about two different things. There's something in the English language, here's my English major coming out, called homophone, where they sound the same, but they have different meanings. And so, just for clarity, we're going to define our terms. What is thinking? So we say that the computer is thinking when we see the symbol, but actually when I see it spinning like that, it's telling me it stopped thinking, it's not going to do what I asked it to do, but that's another story. So René Descartes was known as the father of philosophy, and he equated thinking with being. He said cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am. He's also the guy who brought algebra and geometry together, so if you hate plotting parabolas, you can blame Descartes for that. But the other thing about him is that this whole idea of thinking and being has really kind of clouded the discussion of humanity at the early stages, say, of a preborn's life. I've seen arguments like this online, this philosophical argument that if it's not thinking, it's not human yet. To which I would answer, well, what about a person who's unconscious? You know, so we're going to look at the dictionary definition. I don't normally like online dictionaries because they can change overnight. And I actually have a lesson that talks about the language and how, and I take screenshots all the time because I've learned that if I pull it off something online and then I look at the link the next day, could be completely different than what I saw. So I take screenshots. And this is the dictionary definition for thinking as far as I'm using it. Using one's mind, which is a kind of a no-duh moment, but a little more deep, is the use of intellect and rational. So again, we're talking about reasoning. And now we're going to look at critical. So there are a lot of different nuances for this adjective, but this is the one that best describes the meaning when used with the word thinking. Exercising or involving careful judgment or judicious evaluation. So that goes back to what we were talking about, the fact that we feel like people are not really wrestling through things and thinking carefully through them. And when I say critical thinking is critical, I mean this definition. Oh, and that was their example. They actually used critical thinking as an example, so I was thinking, oh, that's cool. Being in or approaching a state of crisis. And so a critical situation is a life or death situation. If somebody arrives at the hospital in critical condition, it's a life or death situation. And so I think we have a crisis in critical thinking, and you guys are here, so I'm assuming you agree. That's why you're here. Or you have to be here because this is your class time. But I'm really glad that you are here. I teach high school students. I love your age group. I really connect with the age group. And they came in, some of my students from the other class, and one of them gave me a hug and she goes, "Are you excited?" And I said, "I'm nervous. I'm not used to talking to adults in a situation like this." I have adults in my basement when we do this class, but it's more of a round table. This is a little nerve-wracking. So, I'm going to use these quotes from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. It was written in 1931, and Mustafa Mond, he's part of the state controller, so part of the system that was trying to control the populace. He tells the protagonist of the story, Bernard, "Even science must sometimes be treated as a possible enemy." Yes, even science. And Bernard, who, if you've read the book, he initially pushes back against the system and the brainwashing, but then he succumbs because, of course, it's a dystopian novel, and so things end depressing. But he says, what? But we're always saying that science is everything. And so when did we hear the idea that science is everything and it must be followed? So I'm not going to belabor this COVID debacle too much because we've beaten that drum a lot over the last 5 years, but this is when people began to woke up, some people. And so it is helpful to look at it. So if you'll recall, back in March of 2020, we locked down. And I will never forget it because my daughter worked all year with the theater group on putting on a play, and it was going to be put on that week that they locked it down. And so we went ahead and we, hey buddy, I recognize you. You were from years ago. What's your name again?
Right, hi, I'm Sebastian.
That's right.
Good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you. Yes. Oh my goodness. Sorry. So anyway, we ended up just putting on just one show for parents and families, and we all got COVID, and we all survived. But anyway, I do remember that, and so that was March of 2020, and then just a month later, in April of 2020, Fauci responded to a question about hooking up with a Tinder match. And he said, well, I think that'd be okay if they don't have symptoms, but only if you're willing to take a risk. I'm not going to go into what hooking up on a Tinder match is, but I will say that we probably understand it doesn't involve masking or social distancing. But just a few months later, he said Thanksgiving was going to be too dangerous to get together with your families. Now, he didn't give the caveat on if they're symptom-free and you're willing to take a risk. It was just like, no, I just really recommend against it. And a year later, at Christmas, the same thing. Do you want to... I feel like I'm standing right, yeah. You're good? Okay, alrighty.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, why did people go along with this? You think, what were people thinking? This didn't make any sense. And I would say that it was partly due to this logical fallacy, appeal to authority. Where a claim is supported by citing an authority figure without providing any additional evidence. And of course, this authority figure, had a title and a white lab coat. And so, we bought into it. Many people did. So just for fun, let's take a look at the evidence for whether we should have gone along with this or not. This is a restaurant. If you wanted to eat out during a lot of the lockdowns, we determined what were essential services. And if they served food, it was essential because we need to eat. Now, funny little story, we have friends who own an ice cream parlor, and they joked about the fact that they were able to keep it open during COVID because they were serving food. Now, they had no sandwiches or anything, it was just ice cream and candy, but I mean, can we argue? Isn't that essential? They got something right, at least. But the point is that these places were trying really hard to do what they were told so they could stay open so they would not go out of business. And so if you went to a restaurant, often they would seat you at every other table so that you would have an empty table between you and the other people. And you walked in with your mask, and then you sat down, and if you were eating or drinking, you could take it off. And so how many of you went to a restaurant and sat there with your straw in your mouth the whole time? I'm drinking, leave me alone. Now, if you ate in Jefferson County, it was very chill. But if you were eating in the St. Louis area, it was ugly. So how long do you think it would normally take when you would sit down and let's say you go to a Mexican restaurant where the service is pretty quick? I mean, that's the beauty of a Mexican restaurant. I mean, you order and it's there. So they bring you your chips and you sit there, you eat your dinner, and then you leave. How long, this is not rhetorical, how long do you think you would normally be in a restaurant? An hour? How long?
45 minutes to an hour.
45 minutes to an hour. Okay, we're going to go with a shorter time. We're going to say, no, you're in a hurry, you're going to be in and out. We're going to say 30 minutes. You're only there for 30 minutes. So let's take a look and see what the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, Air Conditioning Engineers has to say about air circulation. So for a typical dining area in a restaurant, the air should be fully exchanged 6 to 8 times per hour, which translates to about 7.5 to 10 minutes for a full air exchange. Now, might I remind you that you're not sitting there at the table in a little tunnel and that the air you're breathing is being sucked up through the roof and being cleaned in some filtration system and blown to the outside. You're breathing. In less than 10 minutes, the guy sitting behind that post is breathing your air and you're breathing his. I'm not an air conditioning engineer, but I believe this had nothing to do with COVID. This is just, you can pull this up online and you can look at a variety of sources that tell you that. We also had a 6-foot rule. And so we had circles, not just inside places. There was a famous place in California. It was a church, and they had circles that families had to stand on where they were singing hymns outside, and there were a couple of people who got arrested because apparently they weren't family members and they were standing on the same circle. But I often thought, what is this 6-foot thing? Now, did they measure it from the center of the circle to the center of the next circle? What if you're standing at the edge of your circle and this person is standing on this edge? Are you now 5.5 feet apart and you're susceptible to catching COVID? Some places had curfews and you had to be locked down and back at home, and businesses shut down by 10 o'clock because COVID comes out to party at 10:05. You know, pot dispensaries and liquor stores were allowed to stay open, essential services. Walmart was able to be open, but a mom and pop store had to be closed. Strip clubs and peaceful protests were allowed because and this is a well-known fact, if you are exercising your First Amendment rights, then you're immune from catching COVID, unless you're in a church, and then it's a super spreader. So you get the idea. Why do you think so many people went along with this? Again, I think we start off with the appeal to authority. So we also respect the office or the organization, the World Health Organization, the CDC. There was also the fear appeal. They were scaring, you know, the Dickens, whoops, there goes my, sorry about that. Did I mess it up? Okay. I talk with my hands. We knew early on what the demographic was that was going to be susceptible, and yet we scared people about children and about healthy college athletes. I had a son who was a baseball player in college, and they made them wear masks when they were, it was college in Illinois, where they were running outside and doing their practices outside. Baseball, if you know baseball, you don't get a more spread out sport than baseball. And he was an outfielder wearing a mask. So there was the appeal to fear, but then there was also the appeal to majority. Like we saw with the lemmings, you might have had some questions early on, but when you saw everybody else doing all of this, you start to question and to doubt. But I would say that there were also those that were shamed into submission. You try to walk into a store without a mask and you would get screamed at by somebody. There were those who were bullied via threats, job loss, denial of being admitted somewhere, or loss of benefits. Now I'm going to go a little deeper here. So when we feel that a group, if people feel that a group, the media, the government, medical establishment, has misled you or even lied to you, then people develop a healthy skepticism toward that group, which is not a bad thing. We're less likely to buy into everything that we see on the news, for instance. And that's a good thing. I think we need to be thinking critically about everything. And so some people will research other sources, or they would get a second or a third opinion when they'd leave the doctor, and those are great things to do. Of course, we were ridiculed for that by doing our own research, which used to be a really commendable thing, but suddenly it was a bad thing. But another result, I think, is that people also engage in what I like to call lazy disbelief. Rather than looking into something further, they just don't believe anything. And that's not good. And so you have the fallacy of composition. If a source is wrong about one thing, it must be wrong about everything. And that's not true. The kids, have you guys ever played two truths and a lie?
Yes. Okay,
so you know how that works. I tell two truths about myself and one lie, and the goal is for you to try to figure out what the lie is. because I've included a lie with my two truths, that doesn't automatically make the two true things that I said lies. But it takes work to try to figure out which is the lie. And a lot of us don't have the time, or we don't want to take the time to figure that out, so it's easier to just dismiss everything. The other logical fallacy is the genetic fallacy, where we dismiss an argument based on the source rather than the content. And I'm going to use the CDC as an example. The CDC came out with a lot of really ridiculous statements during COVID, but that doesn't mean that everything on the website was wrong. In fact, one of my favorite things to do when I was having a discussion with somebody would be to quote the CDC or to show them from something from their website. For instance, they talked about the importance and the strength of natural immunity right on their website. And if you had, for instance, already had measles, then it was not necessary for you to get a vaccination against measles. So the fact that we would need to really wrestle with these things and look deeply into them and check other sources makes it very difficult for people to try to stay on top of stuff. But COVID didn't start this decline in thinking, it only exposed it. And so now I'm going to take what is going to appear to be a sharp turn, but it's all related. The gay liberation movement. It really took off in the 1960s with the protest at Stonewall Inn. Stonewall was a gay bar, and that kind of began this whole we need to come out. And so for the next 30 years, there was a lot of pushing toward this, this agenda. And people at the time were largely opposed to the idea of homosexuality and gay marriage. But after 30 years of this, by the 1990s, there was this idea that there must be a gay gene that will account for a person's sexual orientation. And so, you know, we had people like Ellen come out, and this is the cover of Sports Illustrated. This is Jason Collins, who came out as the first openly gay athlete, and it was NBA basketball. He also claimed to be a gay Christian, a practicing homosexual and a practicing Christian. So this challenged the idea that homosexuality was a sin. And it kind of pushed that idea that people are just born that way. And so then they started telling everybody to quit calling it a choice. This is biology. And that idea is perpetuated today, even though many, many, many studies and articles have failed to point to any genetic link regarding sexual orientation. This is a PBS article. There is no gay gene, no straight gene. This is Harvard. There's still no gay gene. This is Scientific American. Massive study of 500,000 people finds no single gene behind sexual orientation, adding more evidence that there is no gay gene. This is not Christianity Today. This is not, you know, Fox News. These are Harvard and PBS and Scientific American. And yet, the idea that people are just born that way is still the reigning ideology. But after the 90s, the TQ group added on to the LGB group, and they began describing their biological sex as a mistake of some sort, and the phrase born in the wrong body became the politically correct way to describe gender dysphoria. And this is an article from 2008. It's a follow-up from one of the 3 interviews that Barbara Walters did with children who identified as transgender. The opening lines of the article read, Riley received a video game that allowed her to morph a digital body into anything she wanted. The 10-year-old transgender girl, who is biologically a boy, adopted a virtual female persona. And the author says, if only life were so easy that she could just punch a button and turn into a girl. Riley's parents said this, she has a birth defect, and we call it that. Now, what are they referring to? Well, they're referring to Riley's physical genitalia as her birth defect because she was born a boy after all. So this doesn't make sense. Without a gay gene, we're to believe that people are born gay. But with the presence of chromosomes containing DNA with its own set of genes that determine pre-birth whether a person is male or female, we're told that it's a mistake. And we don't follow the science. Sometimes science has to be treated as a possible enemy. This is Jazz Jennings, a young boy who was socially transitioned by his mother around age 4, and then went on to have hormone therapy and gender reassignment surgery. I won't go into that, but it's been horrific, and this poor young adult now is just scarred for life. So many health problems. But Jazz wrote this book with Jessica Herthel, the director of the Stonewall National Education Project. So you recall the word Stonewall. And we're talking about critical thinking in our culture. Listen to where we hear the word culture. The description is it's a nonprofit organization that promotes understanding through preserving, interpreting, and sharing the culture of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people and their role in society. But note the change in the language. I have a girl brain, but a boy body. This is called transgender. I was born this way. So this is the kind of the way we've switched a little bit to make it seem like that whole born this way thing still fits, even though it doesn't seem to be used in the same way. This is a non-political, non-religious UK organization, and their goal is just to seek truth through scientific studies, etc. They don't lean right or left. I think they just think, okay, I think we've gone a little crazy here, and there are quite a few groups like that now. And so they try to answer the question, is it possible to be born in the wrong body? And they say, the idea that children are born with an innate gender identity, which means it's just in them, which develops prenatally before they're born, and is impervious to environmental influence. Therefore, the external influences are not going to affect them. This all happens in utero. This idea is not supported by any credible science. And we already saw that before. They go on to say, children's brains are very plastic. They develop through interaction with people and the environment, and they're constantly absorbing information and influences which shape them. So that's the opposite of what we've been told, is that there are external influences that can shape them. Now, do we believe that? Are children's brains really plastic? Do you guys have plastic brains? You do, kind of. How old are you?
14, 13.
Oh, your brain is very plastic. And how old are you?
13.
13.
14.
16.
Okay, none of you are 25. So your prefrontal cortex, I hate to say this, but you guys haven't fully developed brain yet either, as brilliant as you both are. The prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until around the mid-20s to late 20s. And that's the reasoning portion of the brain. That's the part of the brain that helps you make good decisions. And this is why, if you are a male under the age of 25, it's going to cost you a whole lot more money to be insured to drive a car. Because that portion of the brain that tells you, oh, that says 35 miles an hour, I can make it at 60. That's why it costs so much more to insure. And this is true of girls too, but when it comes to cars, it's more true of boys. But science backs this up. When things are introduced before the brain is fully developed, they get wired into the brain's hard drive, so to speak. And that's why studies show that the younger a person begins drinking alcohol, the more likely it is that they will become an alcoholic. The younger a person is that's exposed to pornography is more likely to become addicted to it and have issues with their sexuality. This has actually been proven in many scientific studies. In fact, I saw this thing about the alcohol in the children in my pediatrician's office 25 years ago. And I saw this up there in the study that the doctor was posting it saying, hey, parents, pay attention to this. And I read it and I was fascinated. I mean, it made sense, but I thought, wow, the fact that they actually have studies on that. So now I'm going to step on some toes, and I'm going to start with the parents, but then I'm going to step on the kids' toes, so everybody's going to have sore feet by the time I finish this talk. This last part, influences which shape them. So critical thinking isn't just in looking at our culture and looking at our world. We need to use critical thinking in every aspect of our lives. So as parents, we know that more is caught than taught. That is actually scientific fact. And we all know this innately. We know that you learn better by doing and experiencing and watching than you do by just being told. And so we need to apply critical thinking skills to our relationships. So for instance, if we just talk at people, they will tune us out. If we tune them out enough, if we're constantly distracted, then they will begin to do the same. And so this works in a parent-child relationship, but it's true for all interactions. And this is true for kids too. You know, your body language, how we treat, you know, the people around us that are talking to us, the facial expressions. And believe me, parents do this too. We're all guilty of this. How about how you are with your friends? Are you cutting people out, ignoring people, making them feel less than, not important, not treating them like they're made in the image of God? So how we treat others is extremely important, and we need to understand that if we get angry, sarcastic, or impatient with people who are less informed on a topic than we are, for instance, maybe it's somebody that is, maybe it's somebody that's a brand new Christian, or maybe they're just seeking, maybe they're lost. You know, if you see somebody walking along the side of the road and they look really lost, you know, hopefully you're not going to run your car up on the sidewalk and run them over. You're going to say, hey, you're looking for something, can I help you? And that's, I think, the way that we need to kind of look at people when we run into them. So we're going to go back a few years. One of the most influential books of the 20th century was written during the Great Depression by Dale Carnegie. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. So based on that title, what do you think you're going to get from the book? How to... You guys are so smart. I can see that frontal cortex. But seriously, think about that in light of sharing the gospel or persuading someone to vote a certain way or to change their mind about an issue or making a decision about something big. Carnegie mentions two things. It's a great book, but I'm just going to give you two big takeaways. Two things that help you to make friends and influence them. One is show genuine interest in others. That means not pretending to be interested, saying, hey, how you doing? And then as soon as they start talking to you, you're, you know, looking around. But you're actually listening to them. You're making eye contact. You might be asking them pertinent questions about what they're saying so that they know that you are listening to them. The other thing is to give honest, heartfelt praise. And that one is a little trickier when you are not seeing eye to eye with somebody. You know, I have to say something nice to them. Now, I mean, that's a difficult thing. But these are some of the things that you might be able to do. So you could praise them for thinking deeply about a particular topic. Maybe you don't agree with them, but maybe through your argument you could tell they're really trying to think through it, and that's commendable. Maybe you can praise them for some moral aspect of their thinking. You could say, well, I see that you really care about liberty, or the homeless, or financial responsibility. Or I could see you have great compassion. Or just simply, you're very passionate about this, and that's a good thing. Because I'll tell you, if you're having an argument with somebody that's passionate about it, if you can get them to come onto your side, that passion then is on your side. Somebody that's apathetic they're not going to do anything either way. Sometimes you will recognize that you can't even praise them for having a civil discussion because they're cussing you out and they're yelling at you and you're not getting a word in edgewise. At some point, you do have to realize it's time to brush the dust off your sandals and say, well, you know, thank you, and move on. But these good conversational habits make good people skills. And the way that we converse with our friends and our family, those become habits. And that means that we have to avoid the sarcastic comment, even if you think it's really clever. And I'm guilty of this. You know, I raised 5 teenagers and I got really good with some really quick, sharp-witted, snotty, snarky, you know, things. And you also need to skip the put downs, even if you think it will shut them up. It might shut them up, but it might completely shut them down, and that's not the goal. That's not winning anybody over. Stop the eye rolling, the interruptions, the sighing, etc. And we all do these things, especially with people that we know and we love. But I think this is just as difficult. Try not to make those snarky jokes about a particular individual or a demographic group, even when you're in a group of like-minded friends and you think that they will all agree and that they will all laugh. And this is why. Because what we do in private becomes a habit, and then that can slip out when we're in public. And I'm sharing an embarrassing story with you. I took a break in between my associate's degree and my bachelor's degree, and I was working in sales with a bunch of men, and they were all, swearing and cussing, and I wanted to be one of the guys, so I started picking up a lot of that language. And I was having lunch with my mom one day. I was in my early 20s. And we were having a lovely lunch and just a nice conversation. We weren't arguing or fighting at all, and just something came out, and I was just like, and I thought my mother's hair was gonna set on fire, and I felt just really stupid. And I also realized that it was lazy thinking. I didn't take the time to think of a better way to word what I was gonna say. I was just saying what I was used to saying. So the point is that these conversational habits, if we make good ones, then they will create good people skills, and that's going to help us reach people more effectively. Carnegie also said that you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years. Try to get them interested in you. Stop. Social media? Likes, views. How many people have looked at this? I just did a lesson on technology and how they absolutely control the dial on how often and how spread out you see the likes, so that you just keep coming back and looking again and again and again. But let's just take this practically. Have you ever been around somebody who you haven't seen them in a while, and all they do is talk about themselves? Talk about their family, talk about their job, talk about themselves. They don't even ask you, how are you doing? And you're thinking, there they are again. You see them in the store, and you're kind of like, I had a friend in California. We were good friends in high school. She went to UC Santa Barbara. I went to San Jose State. And she would come home to visit. She'd call me up and say, hey, you want to go to lunch? And I'd say, sure. Well, we did that about 3 times. And I would sit there and eat my entire lunch uninterrupted, because she talked the entire time. Never once did she ask me anything. I heard about her boy problems, roommate problems, professor problems, the grade problems. And never once did she ask me about myself. So she did call me up one day and say, hey, I'm in town. You want to have lunch? And I said, I'm busy all week. Because that's the thing. Now, think about a friend, and hopefully you have at least one person in your life like this. Hopefully it's you, who not only asks you how you are and really listens, but they remember what you said the last time, and they say, hey, did you get that assignment turned in on time? How'd it go when you broke up with your boyfriend? Was it tough? Did your son find a job to get into the college that you were looking for? And you know that person is somebody you love being around, because they make you feel really special. And there's more to being persuasive than just having good arguments and effective techniques. God expects more from us. And what does the Bible say about how we should view others? Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. So Carnegie was simply echoing this sentiment from Scripture. So this is not about putting yourself down or putting somebody else up on a pedestal. This is about treating them like they're the man or the woman of the moment. You're talking to them, you're focused, you are in the moment. The Greeks were known for wrestling through deep questions in search of the truth. So if you'll recall from the book of Acts, the Greeks wanted Apostle Paul to teach them something new at the Areopagus. And so Paul began by finding something to sort of praise them about. I mean, he knew they had this ridiculous statue that was labeled to an unknown god that they were worshiping. They didn't even know who it was, but just in case we forgot somebody. And instead of ridiculing them, he said to them, I can see that you're a very religious people. That's a very, very clever way to start off with something that would open their ears instead of shutting them down. And then he went on to explain that their unknown God is the God of the universe, the one true God. So asking questions in argumentation is known as the Socratic method. And Socrates was a Greek philosopher who lived a few hundred years before Christ. But long before Socrates, God used this method of argumentation with Job. Do you understand the breadth of the earth? And he wasn't too happy, so he said, tell me, since you know it all. But when it comes to, and we should not, we're not God, so I don't recommend that tone or that manner, but the thoughtful questions will help you connect with others, learn who they are, build deep relationships, and guess what? These are all ways to win friends. They will also help you define the real problem and frame the right issues, which is a great way to influence people. So Carnegie was really onto something. This is from a very current article that I pulled up. Why do we need to define the real problem? So here's the thing. You know somebody's about to make some really dumb decision, and you're thinking, I've got to talk to them. I have to stop. Maybe it's a child. Maybe it's a sister or brother or whatever. And so you come at them, kind of attacking them with your bullet points. And you're like, well, first of all, A, and then B, and then C, and then D. And, you know, you get down, by the time you're at E, they've already tuned you out. They're not listening to you. But maybe E was the one thing that would have convinced them. But they're not listening to you now. So instead of going at them and saying, okay, I got all this to say to you, to say, so what is making you want to do that? What are you thinking? You know, what were your thoughts on this? So why did you not like the idea of doing that? And listen to them, hear them. Don't sit there while they're talking and thinking of your rebuttal. Listen, because you know what? You may think, oh, bingo, I know exactly what to say, and then you hone in on that. There's no better role model for how to do these things than Jesus himself. You know, he always had the right question at the right time. For people, they'd ask him a question, and he'd come back with a question that really made them think, sometimes stumped them, they'd walk off. You know, those who were interested in following him would learn, and they would just realize, wow, and they were amazed. And then those who didn't like him would just get, you know, and you will have people like that. That'll happen. But here's the thing, doing these things, it works with everybody. Kids, teens, spouses, members, you know, coworkers, etc. Works with everybody. And this works by showing genuine interest, being respectful, is effective when you're talking to people about politics, religion, cultural issues, family matters, relationship struggles. It's just really important to do this in everything. And I don't always do this right, just ask my kids. It's interesting because our older 3 kids were born boom, 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 and made a lot of mistakes, you know, did the best I could. We were first generation Christians, and so didn't really have role models, and just kind of figured it out as we went along. Way different than I did the last 2 kids, and last 2 went a lot easier with the last 2, but we're a very close-knit family. God redeems and restores the years the locusts have eaten, and we're a very close family now, even with the older kids that I messed up. So, but I've also had some great conversations with strangers about some very sticky topics, and this is kind of, I mean, this blew me away because on one of the occasions I was knocking on doors and I was talking to people about school board and that sort of thing, and this woman came out and she started yelling at me. And I mean, she didn't just yell at me, she was in my face yelling at me. I was just kind of backing up because I didn't want her to spit on me. And I just started asking her questions. When I had a chance, I would just ask a question. And I was able to bring the temperature of that down, and we talked for 30 minutes and had the most civil discussion. And when we were done, she said, wow, I think I need to do some more research, and asked me for some of the things that I had mentioned, and I can tell you about this after class if you're interested. But anyway, I walked away from there. This happened after the first year teaching this class, and I walked away from that thinking, it works, it really works. And I told the class, I was like, wow, this stuff really works. Kind of like, I was teaching it thinking, well, that's what they say works, but when you start practicing it, it's amazing. Had another exchange with a neighbor, changed his vote on a particular issue. And he wasn't yelling at me. He was like kind of making fun of me and acting like I didn't know anything. He knocks on our door. My husband is here now. He knows this guy has knocked on our door before. Is your wife home? I want to talk to her about these, who's she voting for? So I kind of won him over. So if you recall this slide from my earlier montage, this is not just a cartoon, it's reality today. And so now I get to step on everybody's toes. We can't show genuine interest. We can't listen attentively. We can't connect with others or build deep relationships if we're constantly distracted. And some of you may be dealing with a difficult relationship in your life, or maybe you and your parents are butting heads, or maybe you have a struggling, maybe it's a marriage issue, or you have a really difficult boss. But as tough as it is to hear this, the answer is always compassion. And the reason why I know this is because there are multiple passages speaking of the compassion of Christ. And if you'll notice, whenever he was looking at the crowd, he had compassion on them. Well, who was in the crowd? A bunch of dirty, rotten sinners. And yet he had compassion on them. And so the point is, treat people with compassion just like Christ did. That doesn't mean that we run away from the truth. That doesn't mean that we don't confront things when we need to confront things, but it's difficult when you're dealing with people who you vehemently disagree with. But it's the only answer, because if we're supposed to pray and if we're supposed to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, then how much more should we do that for people that we're just disagreeing with, whether in our family or in our circle? And the power of prayer is huge, so you should always pray for your words to be encouraging and edifying. And so praying scripture is really helpful. This is one of my favorite ones. I actually prayed it before I came here today. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. And this verse here is referring to getting arrested and hauled into court in the midst of persecution, but it's still appropriate to pray for the Spirit to guide our speech. And since Matthew tells us that Jesus told us not to worry, this applies as well. But when they hand you over, do not worry about how to respond or what to say. In that hour, you will be given what to say. That doesn't mean not to plan, not to prepare. I didn't come to you today just on prayer and didn't prepare anything. I actually put a lot of work into this. But at some point, I had to say, you know what, this is yours, Lord. Just work in the hearts as, just however it'll glorify you. And then this last one is very personal for me because one of my sons, I mentioned this earlier, and I had gotten into this very sarcastic joking thing. And at first it was kind of funny and, it was like, who can be more witty? But then the jokes got a little more cutting and a little more cruel. And we both realized that, this is not good. And so we found this verse and we memorized it when he was in high school and really tried to turn things around. I'm very close to this. I'm close to all of my kids now. But do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. So again, we may have a really clever thing to say, but we need to ask ourselves, is that going to accomplish the purpose? My purpose here is to change a heart or change a mind, to lead them to Christ. So remember that sometimes there's nothing you can do. You're only responsible for your own actions and your own motives, and you do this by taking every thought captive and turning it over to Christ. You're responsible for speaking truth and for sharing the gospel, but you're not the one who saves. In John 14:27, Jesus said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you." And so this, again, it doesn't mean you shouldn't hold your children accountable for the sake of peace. But we are to live a Romans 12:18 life in our homes and actually in our circles, if possible, so far as it depends on you, because sometimes it doesn't, be at peace with everyone. But again, that doesn't mean remaining silent about areas of sin. It doesn't mean speaking truth. What it means is striving for that equal amounts of grace and truth and mercy and justice, and always speaking with gentleness and respect. And you'll find that as you become a better listener, others will listen more respectfully to you, and you'll be more effective. And so to finish with our little black hole analogy, so when I said that light and matter are forever swallowed up in that black hole, thankfully God did not put us in floating in space, but we're here on Earth, and so there is hope for those in the darkness. I have come into the world as light so that whoever believes in me may not remain in darkness. So hopefully, by thinking critically and applying those skills to people that we talk to, we can help bring others out of the darkness. Thank you.